before the prayers were spoken, before the pews were placed, before the steeple reached upward like a clenched finger toward heaven. The ground was already claimed by something older, something that listens, something that breathes. Connecticut is filled with places where time doesn't behave the way it should. Not far from the Massachusetts border, there's a town called Lebanon. Some would call it sleepy. Others would say it's peaceful, untouched, even idyllic. But those are just words people use when they understand the layers beneath the place. Lebanon isn't just quiet, it's listening. This story starts on a parcel of land just outside the old village green. The trees bend slightly toward each other there, like they're holding secrets between them. The grass never quite dies, even in deep winter. And no matter the time of day, it always feels like late afternoon. That hour just before dusk, when your eyes start playing tricks on you. On that ground stands a church, or what remains of it. It was built in 1732 during a period of frenzied expansion by English settlers. The land had only recently been acquired, a polite term used in colonial records that ignores the deeper truth. This was Mohegan land, held for generations and marked as sacred. Not sacred in a way Europeans understood, not for worship, but for caution, for boundaries, the kind of place their stories warned against crossing, not because of superstition, but because of memory. Mohegan elders once forbade burial on that hill. They never built shelters there, never hunted its game. It was spoken of in quiet tones and referred to by a name that roughly translates to that which sleeps below the root. Children were told not to play near it. Even warriors wouldn't camp within sight of it. But when the settlers arrived, they did what settlers often did. They cleared the forest, burned what wouldn't yield, and dug down. They dug deep. The earliest town records are sparse, hand-scrawled inventories, letters, and financial ledgers, but certain entries stand out. One mentions a strange sinkhole that opened during construction. Another refers to the hiring of outside laborers for unconventional reinforcement of the earthworks. But the most unsettling record is dated October 7th, 1732. The sound returned, like wind through a throat. Mr. Stone recommends proceeding. The sacrifice has been made. Mr. Stone refers to Reverend Eliakim Stone, the church's first minister. He was known for his stern sermons and a theology that mixed fire and brimstone Calvinism with something less orthodox, something closer to folk magic. His personal diary, preserved and protected by the Connecticut Historical Society, begins like any other from that period. Reflections on morality, weather patterns, attendance at sermons, but over time, the entries shift. They become urgent, then cryptic, then terrified. Here are a few lines pulled directly from those pages. March 14th, 1734. Brother Whitmore awoke at the altar, pale as death. Said he heard a song beneath the planks. Said the voice was his mother's, though she passed years ago. May 9th, 1735. The goats break loose every Sabbath. The horses will not approach. The wind outside does not match the wind within. August 2nd, 1736. I rebuke the floor, but it answers. The soil exhales at night. These aren't metaphors. Stone was documenting phenomena that the congregation experienced firsthand, and they were desperate to keep it hidden. The construction of the church foundation is unlike any other in the region. Stone rings laid in triple formation, each layer descending deeper than standard practice. There are even notes suggesting the involvement of a stonemason from Salem, a man who had fled Massachusetts under suspicion of dabbling in ancient practices, though what that means exactly remains unclear. Local folklore says that before the final ring was sealed, an animal, and in at least one case a human child, was lowered into the center. They called it binding. They said it would ensure the church would stand forever. They said it was necessary to quiet the trembling. These details were not passed down in sermons. They weren't spoken aloud in daylight. They were whispered across porches and fire pits, late into the New England night, after the children had gone to bed. But stories have a way of surviving. Today, the church stands mostly abandoned. It isn't condemned, not officially. But no pastor has stayed for long. In 1968, Reverend Jonathan Hale led services there for just under 2 months. On his final Sunday, he gave a sermon no one could follow. Fragments of scripture laced with unfamiliar names. One member of the congregation described it as a warning, though I don't think he meant to give it. After the service, Reverend Hale walked to the altar, sat down, and wept for almost 20 minutes. Then he locked the doors and never returned. His belongings were found still unpacked in the church basement. His journal was discovered 2 years later, water-damaged and filled with half-finished Latin. On the final page, only 2 words remained legible. Still breathing. What exactly lies beneath that foundation? No one has been able or willing to find out. But even now, some who walk by say the ground feels warm near the north wall. Some say it vibrates faintly if you place your ear to the wood. And some just don't go near it at all. If you've made it this far, you're already part of the search. At MindFuel, we bring forward stories with roots, places where folklore and fact blur, where history doesn't sleep peacefully. So if you're drawn to the unexplained, to the places forgotten by time but remembered by the earth, subscribe and stay close. Because what's waiting beneath this church hasn't finished telling its story. In the next chapter, we'll explore the crawl space beneath the pulpit, where recordings were made in the 1990s by an amateur historian who swore he heard voices in the dirt. Some say the tape still plays, even when unplugged. Some buildings hold memories, others refuse to forget. By the turn of the 19th century, the old church in Lebanon was considered out of step with its time. The stonework had begun to buckle. Moss grew thick between the bricks. The pews were warped from cold winters and humid summers. By 1831, it was time for renovation. It was supposed to be a routine effort: foundation reinforcement, updated woodwork, and finally sealing off the old basement crypts that had long since fallen into disuse. What they got was silence, and then a name no one wanted to speak again. Historical records from the renovation are sparse. The local town hall fire in 1886 destroyed a good portion of the written archive. But a few handwritten letters remain, kept only because they were never sent, passed down through the family of a man named Eli Carter. Carter was 14 when he took an apprenticeship with a carpenter working on the church. In a letter addressed to his older brother in Boston, he writes, "They sent me to fetch the iron nails from the understorage. It's stonework down there, arched like a tomb, and it's warm, even though there's no stove. I went in alone, and I didn't come back the same." That letter was found torn in half, wedged behind the false bottom of a tool chest in 1904. It's stained, but legible. It's also the last known writing from Eli Carter, because Eli vanished. He was seen the next morning, sitting on the steps behind the apse, barefoot and soaking wet. The weather had been dry for weeks. Witnesses say he stared straight ahead, not blinking. He spoke only once. "It's still down there. It's not bones. It's not bones." He never spoke again. His parents removed him from the apprenticeship, but 3 nights later, Eli disappeared from his bed. A trail of mud was found leading from the Carter farmhouse all the way to the edge of the church lot. No prints led back. He was never seen again. 2 other workmen also disappeared during the renovation, both older, both experienced, both known to the town. Their names were Joseph Riggs and Daniel Haskett. Neither man had any history of illness or instability, no known debts, no family problems. Riggs was last seen entering the church basement with a ledger book. He was meant to take inventory of the old beams. According to testimony, he entered around dusk. The next morning, his boots were found outside the cellar door, perfectly arranged, as if placed with purpose. The inventory book was never recovered. Haskett, the stonemason, vanished the following week after attempting to remove what he believed was a decayed cornerstone near the north foundation. He reportedly claimed it hummed under his chisel. When asked what he meant, he said only, "You'll hear it too, if you listen long enough, but don't." He never returned to the worksite. Town constables searched the area, even prying up floorboards, but nothing turned up. And then, the incident was quietly folded away. Church attendance declined in the decades that followed. The renovation was never finished. By 1840, the congregation had thinned to a few families. By 1852, the building was only used for seasonal sermons and the occasional funeral. But the oddities didn't stop. In 1957, a local archivist named Walter Brinley began a project to digitize and preserve the town's colonial documents. He had an interest in church records, particularly those related to early Puritan spiritualism and Mohegan folklore. His notes show he became fixated on one artifact in particular: the original cornerstone. It had never been removed. Stone reported it was placed above the breath, which many dismissed as metaphorical or possibly theological. But Brinley wasn't convinced. According to colleagues, Brinley believed the cornerstone might be older than the church itself. He suggested it had been taken, not quarried, and referred to it as a capstone or a stopper. Those were his words, preserved in one of his recorded lectures at the University of Hartford. In October of that year, Brinley filed a request to remove the stone for academic purposes. It was denied, so he went on his own. He returned to the church on a cold Thursday evening. He brought 2 items with him: a crowbar and a reel-to-reel tape recorder. What happened next remains one of the most disturbing unsolved events in Connecticut's historical preservation circles. Brinley never came home. His car was found parked behind the church. The doors were unlocked, and in the trunk were several folders labeled sacrificial construction and ecstatic collapse, terms no one had ever used in reference to colonial New England architecture. Inside the church, his tape recorder was found in the crypt stairwell. The reel had run out, but when it was rewound and played, there were no words, no speaking, just sound, rhythmic, wet, heavy. Some say it resembled a heartbeat. Others described it more like a tide, one that was moving inside the walls. The tape is still held by a private archive. The family sealed access after Walter's death was legally declared, though strangely, no body was ever found. And the cornerstone? Still in place, unmarked, unweathered, and warm to the touch. Locals don't visit that part of town after dark anymore, and those who do, well, they walk faster near the church. Some cross the street altogether, and not a single contractor in the region will agree to any renovation of the foundation. The stone remains exactly where it was laid in 1732, and beneath it, whatever was meant to be sealed has never truly been quiet. You're still here, which means you feel it too. The pattern underneath the silence. At MindFuel, we document what history tried to forget. We piece together the warnings that weren't written for us. subscribe, and return for the next part of our investigation, where we'll follow the only person who's been below the church in the last 20 years, a historian whose camera captured something moving in the dark behind her. She said it wasn't an echo. She said it was breathing back. There are songs that linger, and there are songs that were never meant to be remembered. In the fall of 1871, the small parish at the edge of Lebanon was home to a children's choir unlike any other in the region. They were trained weekly by Sister Abigail Brandt, a devout yet reclusive woman who kept no family and lived alone in the rectory. According to old ledgers, the choir consisted of 12 children, ages 7 to 13. Local accounts praised their voices as otherworldly and beautiful beyond reason, drawing visitors from as far as Massachusetts to attend their Sunday performances. But there was something no one could explain. By 1873, reports began to surface that the choir had altered its songbook. They no longer sang traditional hymns. They no longer sang in Latin or English. They sang in something else. One letter, preserved in the Connecticut State Library, written by Reverend Miles Kemper, who served the church during that era, describes the shift in disturbing detail. It was not any tongue I had studied, not Hebrew, nor Greek, nor of any root language I know, yet it moved the soul. God help me, it moved the soul. There was rhythm to it, a call and response cadence, a kind of rise and fall that stirred the walls of the sanctuary. There's an audio transcription of an 1898 interview with Clara Forbes, the last surviving member of that original choir. She was 11 when the new songs were introduced. Her voice, fragile, shaking with age, recalls only fragments. We were taught by Sister Abigail. She said the notes weren't for people, that they were old, older than the books, and that if we sang them sweet enough, it wouldn't wake up. I didn't know what she meant until I heard the cellar breathe. She pauses, then whispers, "It was behind the walls." Listening. Newspapers from the time are eerily silent on the matter. No mention of concern, no record of inquiries. But buried in the church's personal records, kept in a locked drawer and rediscovered in 1962, was something else entirely. A black hymnal. It contains no title, no known composer. The pages are bound with thick corded thread, and the notes appear hand-drawn, etched in a looping spidery script that does not conform to any Western notation system. The musical bars twist upon themselves, bending upward as if pulled by invisible hooks. When shown to ethnomusicologists in the 1980s, the consensus was unanimous. This was not a known language, nor a known form of music. A notation expert from Yale, Dr. Raymond Kask, remarked, "It's not a hymn, it's a binding. The structure is deliberate, repetitive, incantatory, like someone singing to keep something still." And there's more. Following renovations in 1910, a carpenter named Harold Mentz discovered strange carvings beneath several pews, etchings previously concealed by rotted floorboards. These were geometric in nature, concentric circles, interlocking arrows, and what appeared to be stylized figures, always depicted facing downward. At first glance, they seemed like childish doodles. But one historian traced the symbols back to protective wards used by early Puritan sects who had broken away from Salem-era orthodoxy. Their beliefs were rooted in spiritual containment, rituals not of summoning, but of imprisonment. These markings were accompanied by phrases etched in early colonial shorthand. "Keep it in," "Sing at dawn," "Do not stop while the sun is low." At first, the town assumed these were relics of an overactive imagination. But in 1906, a man named Theodore Ames, then 92 years old and the last elder born before the Civil War, gave a testimony to the Lebanon Historical Society. It was recorded in shorthand by a young student archivist named Sarah Langley. The transcript survives today. Ames recalled a particular Sunday service. He would have been just 10 years old. It was like the air shifted. We were halfway through the fourth hymn. Abigail's girls had just started their new song, and every window in the chapel fogged from the inside. My mother clutched her chest. She said she heard words behind the melody, whispers coming from under the floor, and she wasn't the only one. Ames said many of the older parishioners left during that hymn. A few collapsed. One woman reportedly seized in the third pew, but the children kept singing. They weren't our hymns, he said, and they weren't for God. They were meant to keep it asleep. And for years, it seemed they succeeded. But the choir disbanded without explanation in 1874. Sister Abigail was never seen again. Some say she died of consumption. Others say she vanished into the hills. The rectory was found empty, her sheet music gone. And with her disappearance, the songs stopped. That winter, the ground beneath the church froze and cracked, something it had never done before, not in recorded memory. Multiple parishioners reported low wailing heard at night, echoing through the frost-laced trees. Children had nightmares. Several families moved away. By 1876, the church had fewer than 10 regular attendees. Today, you can still see the carvings if you peel back the boards beneath pew 6 and 11. They've faded with time, but the shapes remain, scratched deep into the wood as if someone wanted them to last longer than the floor itself. The hymnal? It's held in restricted storage, but photographs exist. Scholars who've studied them report strange symptoms: headaches, tinnitus, and, in 2 cases, vivid auditory hallucinations lasting days. As for Clara Forbes, the last choir girl, her interview cuts off unexpectedly. She was found hours later wandering through the cemetery across from the church. She kept singing the same 3 notes, over and over. No words, just sound. Sound meant to keep something quiet. You're still listening. That means you understand what most people won't. Some stories weren't lost. They were hidden. Here at MindFuel, we bring you to the threshold of those forgotten places and the people who never came back from them. Subscribe and join us for the next chapter. Because what's beneath that church hasn't stopped listening. In part 4, we'll speak with the caretaker who lived on the property in 1994. He saw something move under the floorboards, and what he saw crawled like a man, but had no face. Restoration isn't always about beauty. Sometimes it's about trying to hold something together that was never meant to last. In early spring of 2024, a restoration architect named Lena Carver arrived in eastern Connecticut with a simple mission: stabilize the structural integrity of an abandoned colonial-era church that was in danger of collapsing into its own foundation. It wasn't her first historical site, but it would be her last. Lena specialized in churches. She'd worked on 19th century cathedrals in Maine, converted sanctuaries in upstate New York, and one crumbling Methodist chapel along the Hudson where the air always smelled faintly of sulfur. But the moment she arrived in Lebanon, she said something felt wrong. She wasn't a superstitious woman, but when she stood in front of the weather-beaten white clapboard facade, its spire leaning slightly westward, she noted, almost casually, that the grass in front of the church didn't grow evenly. There was a patch, nearly a perfect square, just left of the front door, where nothing grew at all. As she stepped inside for the first time, she immediately noticed the scent. It wasn't mildew. It wasn't rot. It was older than that. A dry, mineral-heavy air, like stone freshly cracked open. She chalked it up to time. The floorboards groaned under her boots as she moved through the nave. Daylight leaked through warped, stained glass panels, casting fractured shapes onto the pews, some of which had been toppled long ago, as if in a hurry. In the chancel, a stack of documents had been left in a warped filing box. Inside, property records, donation logs, a single black and white photo of a children's choir from the 1870s, and blueprints. Not modern prints, hand-drawn architectural maps, yellowed with age. One in particular stood out. It showed a sealed level beneath the main floor, a basement, roughly 20 by 30 feet, labeled only with the word interred. Lena paused. There had been no mention of a crypt in her client's restoration notes, and when she searched the town's building archives the next morning, she found nothing. No record of excavation, burial, or construction beneath the church. She brought it up at a local diner while grabbing breakfast on day 2. The response was silence. Locals wouldn't meet her eyes. One woman muttered something about outsiders always digging where they shouldn't. A man in overalls made the sign of the cross. The waitress gave her coffee for free and walked away without a word. Only one person spoke to her directly. She was seated at the very back of the diner, an elderly woman in a thick wool coat, wearing a silver locket shaped like a bell. Lena hadn't noticed her come in. She just appeared there, watching. When Lena approached, the woman didn't smile. She didn't ask who she was. She simply leaned in and whispered, "If you open the floor, don't breathe through your mouth." Then she stood and left. No explanation, no name. Later that week, Lena returned to the church with ground-penetrating radar equipment, standard in restoration work of older properties where undocumented basements were a risk to structural stability. She swept the nave floor carefully, following the blueprint scale, and the moment the scanner passed beneath the organ pit, the feedback changed. The reading indicated not only a hollow chamber, but multiple layers of disturbed soil. Something had been buried. Something had been moved. Twice. She recorded the data, sent it to her project supervisor. No reply. That night, she stayed in the small rectory next door, a practice she often used to save travel costs. It had no electricity, so she relied on her battery-powered lanterns. Around 3:17 a.m., she was awakened by the sound of movement. Not footsteps, not creaks, movement beneath her. She described it later in a private journal, found months after her disappearance. It's like something big is shifting in the walls, not crawling, not walking. It's rolling over, like it's uncomfortable. She went back to sleep, or tried. The following morning, she made her decision. She would open the floor. She marked out the blueprint's edges with chalk, then carefully began peeling back the aged planks. Each board resisted, as though they had fused with time. Beneath the fourth panel, she found something unexpected, a cloth bundle, wrapped tightly in linen and tucked between joists, sealed with wax. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing small objects inside. Children's teeth. Dozens of them. Tiny, milk-white, some carved with sigils. Lena recoiled, but curiosity won. She dug deeper. Just below the final layer of joists, she uncovered an old iron ring embedded in stone, a handle. She braced herself and pulled, and a circular trapdoor opened with a groan that echoed through the sanctuary like the breath of something waking. A cold gust rushed upward, heavy, stale. She knelt at the edge, aiming her flashlight into the crypt. The beam struck earth, then bone, then something that looked like petrified wood, but bent in a way wood does not bend. She lowered the light further and saw the outline of a staircase carved directly into stone, leading down into the dark. The air that came up wasn't just cold, it was thick, and she remembered the old woman's words. Don't breathe through your mouth." She didn't, but her flashlight flickered, and then she heard it. Not a voice, not an echo, a hum, low, continuous, not human. She dropped the beam and scrambled back. As she did, the hum grew louder, as if whatever was beneath had noticed the light and did not like being seen. The next entries in Lena's journal become erratic, disjointed. She writes of strange dreams, of children standing silently at the foot of her bed, of a man with a jaw that opened the wrong way. She describes waking up to find dirt under her fingernails, dirt she didn't remember touching. And on one night, she claims she woke with a hymn in her throat, one she did not know, and could not stop singing. By the time her project supervisor arrived to check on her progress, Lena was gone. The crypt door was open. The beam of her flashlight lay flickering at the foot of the stairs. The last page of her journal? It was written in a language no one could translate. This is just the beginning. When you subscribe to MindFuel, you step into real mysteries layered in silence and shadow. In the next segment, we follow the local historian who tracked Lena's last steps, and what he found under the choir loft changes everything we thought we knew about the church. And what it was meant to contain. What Lena had uncovered wasn't just a flaw in the floor plans. It was a silence deliberately engineered, a forgotten void beneath sacred ground. And as the town watched her every move from behind half-closed curtains, one thing became clear. The church hadn't been built on faith. It had been built to keep something down.